Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She flirted across the table like she wanted me to see it. Like the whole point was my silence. We were sitting in a small corner booth at a Chick-fil-A near her office, the same place where we used to grab quick lunches when life felt simple. I'd taken my usual seat, back to the wall, the way I always did. Engineers keep structure close. But that day, structure broke clean in half the moment her eyes drifted past me. He walked in 5 minutes after we ordered. Mark, the guy I fired a year ago for manipulating reports and throwing his own team under the bus. The guy she knew I couldn't stand. Not because he was competition, but because he represented everything I swore I'd never become. Careless, sloppy, and addicted to shortcuts. She looked right at him and smiled with a softness she hadn't offered me in months. He came over to the table with that same loose smirk he always wore, like he'd gotten away with something the rest of us were too slow to catch. She shifted in her seat, angled toward him, let her laugh go just a little too easily. I watched her fingertips tap her straw like she was nervous excited, the way she used to be with me. She asked him how the new startup life was going. He bragged about bouncing between contracts, pretending instability was freedom. I didn't interrupt. I didn't lean in. I didn't even blink. I just watched, quietly, as she fed him pieces of her attention like she wanted to see if I'd snap. Instead, I whispered something only she could hear, right as Mark walked away to order. I kept my voice level, steady, built from the discipline of a man who understands pressure better than emotion. He can have you. I didn't raise my eyes when I said it. I didn't add a question, didn't add a threat. I just let the words sit there, between the napkins and the untouched fries, while the noise of the restaurant washed over us. She froze. Just for a second. Enough for me to know she heard the shift. Later that night, when she claimed she needed to run to Walmart for a few things, I already knew she wasn't shopping. I also knew something inside her had cracked, not because I yelled, but because I didn't play. She expected a fight. I gave her silence. And silence is the one thing she never learned how to control. I didn't follow her that night. I didn't ask where she really went. I just sat in the quiet living room with the TV still logged into her Netflix profile, the one she never bothered to switch out of. The menu played its usual soft hum, but I didn't press anything. I let the silence fill the room the way water fills a cracked pipe. Slowly, inevitably, with pressure she wouldn't feel until later. When she came home, she moved lightly, almost rehearsed, dropping a small plastic bag on the counter like proof she'd actually been at Walmart. There was nothing inside except a candle and some gum. People don't drive 20 minutes at night for gum. She didn't look at me when she walked past, expecting me to ask questions I no longer had any interest in asking. I didn't turn my head. I didn't speak first. I just let her feel the cold shift in the air, the one she created and didn't see coming. The next morning, I changed the pattern. I left earlier than usual, slipping out while she was still getting ready. She heard the door close, but didn't come out. She probably thought I was angry, but anger is loud. What I felt was quieter, more decisive. I took my Toyota Camry and drove the long route to work, letting the steady hum of the engine clear whatever noise she had tried to plant in my mind. Structure is easy to return to when everything else breaks down. Around noon, I stepped into the engineering bay and found my friend Joshua standing near my station. He lowered his voice when he saw me. He'd been at the Chick-fil-A the day before. He saw her lean toward Mark. He saw the shift. And he said something soft but precise, the kind of thing a man says when he respects you enough not to sugarcoat the truth. He told me the look on her face wasn't accidental. I didn't respond. I didn't defend her. I just nodded once and went back to my desk, letting his words settle like calibration dust inside a machine. That was the moment I understood she wasn't testing limits. She was waiting for the chaos to hit me. But it didn't. It slid right past, because I'd already stepped out of the game. I started noticing the details she thought I'd never catch. Not the obvious ones, those were too easy. It was the rhythm of her attention, the way she drifted in and out of the room like someone living on two different frequencies at once. She'd sit beside me on the couch at night, unlock her iPhone, and pretend to scroll through Netflix for something we could watch together. But her eyes kept flicking down to the corner of the screen where notifications appeared. Quick, sharp, guilty, if you knew how to read the microseconds. I didn't confront her. I didn't lean in. I didn't ask who she was messaging. I just let the silence build around her movements, the way engineers pressure test a system by watching where the cracks form on their own. And the cracks were everywhere. She tried to hide it behind soft hums, little comments, shallow questions. It didn't matter. The distance was already measured, mapped, and logged inside me. 2 days after the lunch at Chick-fil-A, her coworker, Emily, stopped by my office. She had a reason, technically, a form to sign, something routine, but she lingered. She lowered her voice, the way people do when they know something but don't want the weight of saying it out loud. She told me she'd seen my wife talking to Mark in the parking lot near her building. Close. Too close. And she said something that hit me with the precision of a well-drawn schematic. She said my wife looked nervous, not excited, like someone who'd crossed a line she didn't think through. I didn't react. I thanked her, signed the form, and went back to work. Steady hands. Steady breath. Steady logic. The kind she'd mistaken for weakness because it didn't explode when pushed. That evening, she said she had to stop by Target after work, her new phrase for disappearing for an hour without explanation. I nodded, grabbed my keys, and left the house before she did. I didn't tell her where I was going. I didn't leave a note. I didn't check in. I drove the car to a quiet industrial lot near the water plant, my usual thinking place, and sat there until the sky went from gold to steel. And in that stillness, I realized something simple, something she would eventually feel like a bruise she couldn't cover. I wasn't tracking her anymore. I was tracking the moment I'd stop letting her orbit around my life. She didn't notice the shift, not at first. People who rely on attention as currency rarely see when someone stops paying. She came home later than usual that night, carrying another small Target bag like it was a shield. She moved around the kitchen with that bright, artificial calm recruiters use when they want to steer a conversation without actually having one. I watched her from the hallway, silent, letting her walk into the quiet I'd already built. She tried to ask if I'd eaten. I said I had. Nothing more. She tried to tell me about her day. I nodded once. No follow-up. No invitation. The space between us didn't widen. It simply became visible. The next morning, I left earlier again, taking the car before she even stepped out of the shower. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it to reclaim the rhythm of my own days. She texted once asking if everything was okay. I let it sit unread. Not as a tactic, but as a correction. For months, she'd answered messages with delays she pretended were accidents. Now she could feel the weight of her own pattern return to her. At work, our security coordinator, a guy named Miller, stopped by my station. He mentioned he'd seen someone tailgating through the visitor entrance yesterday afternoon. No badge, no authorization. When he described the car, I recognized it immediately. Mark's. And the timing lined up perfectly with the hour my wife claimed she was running behind. Miller didn't know the context, didn't even realize he'd dropped a match onto dry ground. But I heard the implication clearly enough. Someone was getting reckless. That evening, I disappeared without leaving the house first. I turned off the location services on my phone, muted everything, and drove the car out past the old rail yard. I parked near the abandoned loading docks and let the engine go quiet. For the first time, I felt the shift inside me settle into place, not violent, not dramatic, just final. She called twice. I let the screen light the cabin, then fade. She left a voicemail asking where I was. Her voice shook, barely, like someone losing their grip on a script they'd relied on for too long. I didn't answer. I let the silence do what she once thought chaos could. And in that empty lot, I realized she had no idea I'd already stepped beyond her reach. I didn't plan to move against him. Men like Mark destroy themselves without help. But when someone aims chaos at your life, you learn to trace the source, not to strike, but to understand the structure of the collapse before it happens. And he was already cracking. The next day at work, one of our subcontractors forwarded me a set of specs with a note attached. He said someone from a partner startup had requested access to our archived designs, claiming I'd approved it. When I opened the request log, the name at the bottom didn't surprise me. Mark had tried to use my old credentials, the ones he still remembered from before I fired him. Sloppy, desperate, predictable. I didn't escalate it. I didn't file a report with my name on it. Instead, I pulled the time-stamped logs, packaged them cleanly, and forwarded them to the compliance department without a comment. Anonymous submissions move faster than personal complaints. They land colder. They force a system to handle truth without emotion. By late afternoon, I heard from the engineering bay that the startup Mark worked for was facing a quiet audit. Not a dramatic one, just enough to force every internal process under a microscope. Enough to make a man like him sweat through his charm. I stayed out of it completely. I didn't have to be present for gravity to work. That evening, I got home before she did. I sat in the living room with Netflix still open on the profile she always used, the screen glowing against a dark room. I wasn't watching anything. I was letting the stillness build. When she walked in, she paused, sensing something off, but not knowing where to look for it. She asked if everything was okay. I said it was fine. Nothing added. Nothing offered. She hovered like she expected a confrontation. But I wasn't giving her the chaos she'd engineered. I walked past her, grabbed my jacket, and stepped back out into the night without explaining where I was going. I didn't take the car to follow her or him. I took it to clear my head, driving aimlessly through the industrial district until the speed of the road steadied my breath. By the time her text came in, asking why I left so suddenly, I already knew she was finally feeling the shift. She wasn't losing me because of what she did. She was losing me because I no longer reacted to it. The social fracture didn't hit her all at once. It started as a small shift in how people looked at her, the way coworkers paused before replying, the way conversations thinned when she stepped into a room. She felt it before she understood it, and by then it was already spreading. I noticed the change when we attended a small get-together at her friend Megan's place. I hadn't planned on going, but showing up without emotion was its own kind of clarity. When we walked in, the room went quiet for a fraction of a second, subtle, but sharp enough for me to catch. She didn't notice at first. She never did. She moved through people the way she always had, bright and smooth, using her recruiter's charm like a social tool. But it didn't land the same. People smiled too politely. They shifted weight. They kept conversations short. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen to grab water, and that's when her brother, Dylan, approached me. He wasn't confrontational. He was confused. He said he'd seen her earlier that week pacing outside the building near her office, on the phone with someone she didn't want anyone to overhear. He said she looked shaken, not playful, like someone who was balancing on a line she knew could snap. He asked me if everything was okay between us. I told him it was fine. Nothing more. His eyes said he didn't believe me, but he didn't push. People rarely push when a man goes quiet for real. I walked back into the living room just as her coworker Emily, who'd visited me days earlier, glanced in my direction. She didn't say anything out loud, but I saw the understanding in her face, the kind that spreads quietly through social circles long before anyone admits they know something. When my wife tried to start a conversation, Emily answered politely, then excused herself. That was the moment my wife finally sensed it. The shift wasn't coming from me. It was coming from everyone else. She looked around the room, scanning expressions she'd always been able to read, and found no anchor. On the drive home, she asked if I wanted to stop for food. I said no. She suggested Taco Bell, the place I once went alone when she ignored my messages. I told her I wasn't hungry. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was defining. The house felt different once the social air around her shifted. She moved through each room a little too carefully, like the floorboards were waiting to expose something she wasn't ready to face. I didn't change anything in my routine. The change was hers alone. She kept trying to anchor herself to the familiar, small questions, forced smiles, soft touches that had once been natural. Nothing connected. My silence wasn't withdrawal anymore. It was distance she couldn't measure. One night, she walked into the living room while I was sitting there with Netflix open on the screen again, not watching anything, just letting the glow fill the space. She stood behind the couch long enough for me to know she wanted me to look at her. I didn't. Not out of spite, but because the pull she used to have simply wasn't there. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. She asked if we could spend the evening together, maybe watch something like we used to. I told her I had work to finish. It wasn't a lie, but even if it had been, she wouldn't have known how to challenge it without revealing how off-balance she felt. She wandered off to the kitchen, opening and closing cabinets as if she were searching for something that would hold her together. A few minutes later, she grabbed her keys and said she needed to pick up a few things, the same excuse she'd used before when she was slipping away into someone else's attention. This time, though, she wasn't hiding a secret. She was escaping the silence between us. She drove to Walmart, not for groceries, but to delay coming home. When she returned, I was still in the same spot. She hesitated before walking in, lingering in the doorway until I acknowledged her with nothing more than a nod. She walked past me slowly, like she hoped I'd ask where she'd been, but I didn't give her that thread to pull. Later that night, I heard her cry quietly in the bathroom, the kind of restrained sound someone makes when they know they're responsible for the fall, but don't understand how to stop it. I didn't move toward her. I wasn't her stability anymore. I had become the one thing she never prepared for, a presence she could see, but no longer reach. She finally confronted me on a Thursday night, the kind of night when the house feels too quiet for two people who used to move in sync. I was sitting at the dining table, finishing a report on my laptop, when she walked in and closed the door behind her. Not loudly, carefully, like she didn't want the sound to shatter what was left between us. She stood across from me, waiting for me to look up. I didn't. Engineers don't react to vague signals. We wait for clarity. When she finally spoke, her voice was thinner than I'd ever heard it. She asked why I'd been so distant, why I barely spoke, why I didn't seem angry, like anger would have been easier for her to handle. She wasn't looking for truth. She was looking for something familiar, something loud, something she could negotiate with. I kept my focus on the screen for a moment longer before closing the laptop. Not abruptly, just precisely. When I finally met her eyes, she flinched, not because I was cold, but because she realized she was seeing a version of me she had no influence over. She tried to explain things I didn't ask about. She said she'd only talked to Mark because she was upset, because she felt ignored, because she just wanted to feel something. Every word sounded like it had been assembled for an interview, polished to be believable. But lies don't bother me. Structure does. And nothing she said held shape. I told her I didn't need explanations. My voice stayed level, as steady as the hum of the car when I drive home late from work. I said I'd already understood everything I needed to understand the moment she leaned across that Chick-fil-A table and gave another man the attention she used to save for me. She waited for more. She wanted a fight, a breakdown, a question she could answer. Instead, I gave her nothing but silence. The same silence she once used to keep me off balance. When she realized I wasn't stepping back into her script, her breath stuttered. She asked if I still cared. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Her eyes filled, not because she'd lost me, but because she finally understood she couldn't pull me back. And somewhere in that quiet room, she felt the truth settle hard. I wasn't walking away. I had already left. Her collapse didn't look dramatic from the outside. It was quiet at first, almost invisible, like a structural fault you only notice once the whole frame starts leaning. But I saw every shift. I recognized the signs the same way I'd recognize stress fractures in a steel beam. Hairline at the start, catastrophic by the end. She began waking earlier than usual, wandering through the house, like she was searching for something she'd misplaced. Not an object, a role. She paused in doorways, studying me while I prepared for work, hoping I'd look up first. I didn't. She tried asking simple things. What time I'd be home, if I wanted dinner, if I needed anything from the store. I answered with minimal words, never unkind, just precise. The way you speak to someone who is technically still in your life, but no longer inside your orbit. The real unraveling started after her team at work held a small meeting without inviting her. She came home early, eyes red, holding herself like she'd just realized she wasn't the center of conversations anymore. I was sitting on the couch with Netflix running as background noise, not watching, just letting the light fill the room. She stood in front of the TV, blocking the glow, trying to force a connection that wouldn't spark. She said people were acting weird around her. She said Megan barely spoke to her that day. She said Emily avoided her in the hallway. For the first time, she didn't tell these things to get a reaction. She told them because she didn't know where else to put the fear. I didn't comfort her. I didn't offer an explanation. I just said she'd figure it out. Nothing more. That night, she drove to Walmart again. Not to escape into someone else's attention, but to delay coming home to the silence she'd built. When she returned, she sat beside me on the couch without speaking, waiting for the space between us to close on its own. It didn't. She started crying softly, the kind of trembling grief that comes when a person finally realizes the consequences weren't created by anyone else. They were earned. I didn't move toward her. I didn't offer a hand. I didn't remind her of anything she'd done. The truth was louder than any accusation. She wasn't losing me. She had already lost the version of me she thought would always stay. She reached her breaking point on a Sunday evening, the kind of evening when the house feels too still for anyone pretending everything is fine. I was sitting at the edge of the bed, sorting through work notes in my head, when she came in and closed the door behind her. She didn't bother wiping her face this time. Whatever pride she'd been holding on to had already thinned to nothing. She stood there for a moment, like she was trying to gather pieces of a language she no longer spoke. Then she said she couldn't take the distance anymore. She said she felt like she was living inside someone else's house, someone else's silence. She asked what she had to do, what she had to say, to bring us back. Her voice broke on that last word. Back. As if the past was still waiting somewhere behind us like an unlocked door. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman she had been before all the noise, before the games, before the need to test how far she could stretch something stable before it snapped. There was no confidence in her posture anymore. No edge, no leverage, just a quiet sincerity that hadn't surfaced in a long time. I didn't stand. I didn't move toward her. I spoke calmly, the way I'd explain a failing system at work, without blame, without heat, just truth. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I'd simply stopped showing up in places where I wasn't respected. The words settled between us like a final blueprint, clear and unbendable. She started crying again, not loudly, but with the kind of grief that comes when reality stops giving room for excuses. She walked closer and sat next to me, not touching me, just close enough to show she finally understood she had no control left to wield. She said she didn't want to lose me. She said she didn't want this distance. She said she was willing to rebuild whatever she broke. I didn't promise anything. I didn't offer comfort. I just let the silence stretch long enough for the truth to settle inside her. Then I told her there was a path forward, but only if it was built on mutual respect, not attention, not performance, not fear of being alone. Outside, I heard the car settling as the engine cooled from the drive home. Inside, she sat quietly, breathing through the weight of everything she'd finally faced. And for the first time in a long time, the silence felt right. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.